Hello and welcome to my video that I gave as part of a Spark Teach Meet on the 28th of January in Dubai. And here I speak about some of the organizations with which I'm associated, and I also gave my website as well. And through showing comparatives, I intended to show how context could be taught. So, in the same style of Cornell notes, I demonstrate at the start of the presentation, as I do with my lessons, 3 key points that I want students to frame and think about more than anything else. The 3 points are this: what is the context of teaching context? How have I seen the teaching of context progress? And of course that relates to me as well. And finally, how can we aim for powerful interpretations? And I've been shown methods that really seem to work, and I want to share them with you through this presentation. So the starting point for my presentation on context is to look at the idea of new criticism. And this is a school of thought, 60s and 70s, that moving on from the formalists decided to remove texts from their socio-historic backgrounds and to analyze them as entities within themselves. And this was useful and interesting, but it really led to some issues. Before I say those issues, I want to point out that it's very attractive to read a text in an almost entirely decontextualized fashion. If you're able to see a text as it relates to you right now, well, that's empowering. And if you are also able to draw an interpretation that you feel has as much authority as any other, that is also powerful. The main issue I have found, though, is that as I have become more educated and I have tried to improve my understanding of, say, politics and psychology, sociology, philosophy and so forth, the framework of literature, particularly English literature, is very narrow and short and fragmented, and is not really a good way, I have found, to create a framework to hang off the other aspects of the humanities. And it's my understanding of history through cultural materialism and so forth that I find really enhance my understanding of literature. I also wanted to talk to you about the fact that in 2017, society is very much one that wants to remove authority and history from our discourse, and alternative facts is indeed a phrase. So the first point I wanted to make was, what has been my progression in the teaching of context? Well, when I first started teaching formally, I was shown that if you included a bit of context in the introduction, then that would be enough. And there were some important and interesting points, but it didn't really enhance my analysis of context. Even now, today, as I record this video, I came across a page on context of Romeo and Juliet, and it spoke about how the parts of women, young women, in Shakespearean plays were played by small boys. And in Romeo and Juliet, as a contextual point, it's certainly interesting, but I'm not entirely certain how that would enable you to analyze most parts of that play in an interesting and worthwhile fashion. So just to return to this, this type of contextual analysis then became something that was added after language analysis, so that once we had analyzed some language points, we would then insert some contextual points, sometimes enhancing the previous analysis of language, although not always. Whereas now, the method I want to show you is one where we offer a comparison between contemporary and contextualized audiences, and this enhances the analysis of both. Let me show you what this might mean. So the first type of analysis was just analysing context in the introduction. And I ask you now, what is the most generic sentence in the history of students analysing Romeo and Juliet? It is, of course, Romeo and Juliet was written by William Shakespeare in 1595. And that sentence, in that order, with all those words, I bet, has been read by almost every single English teacher going. So, a more sophisticated introduction, but still adopting the idea of putting the context as the very first sentence, is as follows. Shakespeare in England was deeply enmeshed in political and religious power struggle that resembled conditions in Italy 250 years before. Both societies, scarred by tragedy, subscribed to the philosophy that fortune, both good and bad, is part of life and, along with God, controls human destiny. Useful, specific, interesting, but as it stands, still only in the introduction. So the next type of analysis is context as a bolt-on. And very often, unless the context that we teach our students, unless that's carefully picked and demonstrated, and I think using the comparative method that I'm going to show you in about 2 minutes, it becomes a bolt-on. It's just added afterwards. It's not really integrated. So here's an example. Romeo and Juliet's first kiss highlights how their relationship is built on a mutual attraction. Upon kissing, Juliet exclaims that Romeo kisses by the book. This mundane image suggests that perhaps Romeo's wooing is somewhat scripted and perhaps even cliched. So here we have our analysis, and the contextual analysis could be the following. An Elizabethan audience would perhaps recognize an element of formality in courtship and would therefore like this image. And again, we could see that more interesting conceptual vocabulary would be ideal here, but essentially we're connecting the idea of contextually, the Elizabethans would enjoy courtship, formality in courtship, and that this image goes along with that idea. It allows them to appreciate that formality in courtship is here. So to improve this, I suggest making your analysis of context comparative, even if it's basic connotations. So make a contemporary interpretation first. And of course, many students will lack historical knowledge of even their own era at the time. There is just what there is. It's not historical, it's just what they understand. And once they have looked at opening connotations of the quotation that they've analysed, then they analyse the past contextual interpretation. So start with the contemporary, then go to the past. So an example is this. A contemporary audience would see a scripted moment of affection as awkward and perhaps even reprehensible. How often would it be that we expect in a contemporary Western audience to see love as being spontaneous, authentic, and, if you excuse the cliche, from the heart? We can then show the reading of the past, maybe even with a phrase like a more enlightened reading, or audiences with an awareness of Elizabethan culture would have perhaps recognized the attraction of formality in courtship for the Elizabethans, and could therefore see this kiss as actually meeting Juliet's expectations for romance. And it's that comparison of where the student is here and their ability to recognize how the context of the Elizabethans will be different that demonstrates that they truly understand the text and they can truly appreciate perspectives outside their own culture, something especially important in this day and age. So, to summarise for students: 1. Compare a contemporary and contextualised interpretation. 2. Compare this after some initial language analysis. 3. Be tentative in analysis of context, especially as a student for whom they would only have, I imagine, a received interpretation of that context. So use could perhaps. And make sure that in your essays, comparative contextual analysis is used sparingly. By that, I mean that it needs to be well judged, possibly once, maybe very rarely twice. Hope this has been interesting and useful. Thank you.